friends. Hello, hi, how are you? I hope you guys are having an amazing day today. So hello. First of all, yes, I'm wearing my own merch. It's in yellow. I love this color. This is the Smoky Glow logo long sleeve. I only mention it because I just came out with new merch for the month of October. It is Spooky Glow merch, and all of the proceeds for all of my merch, the Spooky Glow and the Smoky Glow, will be donated to St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital this month. So I'm really pushing it because I really want to be able to donate a good chunk. We've already made it way more than I thought we would, so I'm really excited. But thank you guys for looking into that. If you're interested in any of the merch, go check it out. It'll be linked down below. So today, the reason we're all here, the secret world of Jeffree Star. Shane Dawson this week released part 1 and part 2 of the secret world of Jeffree Star. I was going to film reactions to every single part as they came out, but since the first two were released so closely together, and I also feel like the first one was definitely more of a setup for the rest of the series, I didn't feel like it warranted its own video. I'm going to briefly touch on the first part at the beginning of this video, and then we'll talk about the second part. I'll put a timestamp like right here if you want to just skip to the second part if you're sick of hearing commentary about the first part, but let's get started. Part 1. Okay. I have to say, it definitely was not like, okay, so I'll just be honest. Part 1 was not like groundbreaking, anything crazy. It was entertaining though. I personally found it to be very entertaining. I will preface this by saying I'm not a Jeffree Star fan. I'm definitely not like a stan of Jeffree's. However, I do find him to be entertaining. You can't lie by saying he's not an entertaining person to watch. And I do think him and Shane have a very interesting kind of like chemistry going off of each other. I really liked that the first part of the video, pretty much about the first half hour, was really just a focus on Shane, kind of like what he's been up to, what's been going on in his life, like what's been going on in his head. And I thought that was really, really interesting. I actually wish that Shane would put more about himself in a lot of his videos, just because I actually am very interested by him. I feel like I want someone to do a Shane Dawson style documentary on Shane Dawson, just because he's so fascinating. So I think the first part was really interesting to hear a little bit more of his narrative about what happened since the first documentary, like what his anxieties about this, his hopes. Like I really, really liked that. He touched on something interesting in the first part of the documentary that I did want to touch on. People online are pretty sick of him making jokes about being poor because to them it's obvious like he lives in like $1 million home like in Los Angeles. Like he's obviously not poor. He kind of defended that a little bit, which I thought was interesting because I've never heard him really like defend that or speak on that, and basically just kind of said like compared to other YouTubers and compared to like other people he's friends with, he's not making the type of money that people think he is. I thought that was interesting. Regardless, I'm not gonna lie, like even if you're like the poor one out of your millionaire friends, you're still not poor. Like I do understand the frustration some people have for him like acting that way, but at the same time, I think if you look at Shane's history, he has openly talked about his mom losing his job, his mom losing his job. Like he's openly talked about growing up pretty poor. And so I kind of think it's interesting because to me, as somebody, I say this in all of my videos and I think everyone's annoyed, like we get it, but like I'm a social work major in college. So we look a lot at this type of stuff. And I honestly, the way that I interpreted it after I heard him talk about it was I think he kind of uses those types of jokes and that type of humor. I don't want to speculate too much because I don't know Shane, but I do definitely get the vibe from him that that's kind of like a defense mechanism and it's something he uses to kind of just like deflect from certain things. And I think, you know, he seems like the type of person based on what we've seen from him. I feel like during that time in his life, he probably did use humor a lot to cope with it. And I think that has carried over despite finding success. So I thought that was interesting, but I definitely see the point of like, yeah, it's like, we get it. Like, you know what I mean? Like I see both sides to that one where I see his side and I see the other side. I don't really understand why people get so mad at him for wearing what he wears. Cause to me, it's just like, he's just comfortable. Like I'm more comfortable in sweatpants and hoodies, even though I own a lot of clothes that are like not that, I'm definitely more comfortable in those clothes. So like, I kind of get that aspect too. I don't know. It's interesting and I'm interested to hear what you guys have to think about that explanation, but I thought it did provide a bit of context while still also I had to roll my eyes at being like, you're the least rich. Other thing I thought was really interesting about the first part that was really about Shane was the fear of flying thing. This kind of took up the entire episode and he said something really profound, I thought, that I think a lot of people who deal with anxiety, at least I know I deal with really bad anxiety and I could relate to it. He was talking about getting on a plane and talking about how as he's gotten older, his fear of flying has gotten worse, feels like he has so much more to lose. And that's something I think a lot of people can relate to. It was something I heavily related to because I've talked about it on my channel because I just had to fly to Texas, but it gave me like paralyzing anxiety to have to get on a plane. I had to literally drug myself to get on an airplane. Like, I cannot get on airplanes at all. I hate doing it. I hate getting on planes. It gives me this horrifying anxiety. It's the same thing with any trips though, like car trips, like any type of travel or any type of, I would say, unnecessary risk. It gives me this like horrible, like paralyzing anxiety. And that was like so true. Like, that's why, is because I have so much more to lose now in my life. I didn't really have anxiety when I was younger because I didn't really have anything. I didn't have anyone that I was like planning to spend the rest of my life with. I didn't have anyone that I wanted to have kids with. Like, I didn't have those things. So I definitely found that to be really interesting and also really relatable. So the second part of the series was obviously the flying, which was kind of funny to see him like freak out, but also he's totally right. I would never in my life get on a small private jet ever. I don't care how much more convenient it is. The statistics on smaller planes crashing is like insane. Like, I do not blame him for 1 second for being afraid to get on that tiny little plane. I never would have done it. I don't know how he did. However, the second part, we saw Jeffree. Jeffree made his entrance. We got to sort of see the inside of like what it would be like for one of those massive meet and greets that Morphe has. It was cool to get to see the inside of what it's like to be at like one of those things and what it's like to be the person that's at the center of a crowd of like 25,000 people. I did think it was interesting how Shane kind of felt like he was worried people weren't going to accept him. I do have to wonder, I'm not trying to be shady because I do like Shane, but I do have to wonder how much of that might have been played up or how much of that is real, genuine insecurity. I don't know him, so I don't know. But at the same time, like, I have to, it's just so hard for me to believe that somebody who has amassed this much success and has like literally 20 million subscribers and gets hundreds of millions of views on his videos wouldn't think that people would be very excited to see him. So that is something I was kind of like, at a certain point it's like, well, you have to know. But sometimes it's like, well, maybe there is always that like insecurity, which they do touch on in the second episode, which I thought was interesting. The other thing I found funny about part one was the shade that was thrown that ended up aging not well. There's a specific moment in the plane when Shane was like, oh, Jacqueline and James, like, we like them, right? And Jeffree was like, yeah, today. And just considering what happened and what went down and what I think they're gonna cover for the rest of the series, that was very interesting foreshadowing, if you will. So far, the amount of shade that's been thrown during this documentary is pretty minimal. There's definitely been some, but it's not been crazy. I think up to this point, we haven't really touched upon like the drama in the beauty community, and I think that's what part 3 is going to be. I'm already like speculating. I really don't like to speculate because I do feel like even though we saw what happened from like when the whole James Charles thing happened, even though we saw what happened from like our perspective, just being the viewers, there's definitely a whole other side to things that nobody saw and that's going to be exposed. And I can't even begin to speculate what was going on there. One other interesting thing to note that, and again, I don't think this is meant to be shady, I definitely noticed that when Shane and Andrew, when they're editing, they do a lot of kind of clips overlaying voices because it makes it more interesting to watch. And a lot of the time when they were referencing drama channels or commentary channels, they showed Rich Lux. Rich Lux, you know, he's a big beauty, he's a big drama channel. He definitely is a figure. He's a staple in the drama community, 100%. However, I do hope that they show people like, you know, T-Spill. I know it's harder to show T-Spill because she doesn't have a face technically, but I feel like it'd be good to show people like T-Spill, Dustin, Viewer's Voice, like the people that kind of also make up the drama community, Petty Page, like all of those people as well. I don't think it's fair to have one person representing that entire community if you're going to make an entire documentary partially based off of that community. Does that make sense? That's just my 2 cents. I thought that was interesting, and I hope that maybe that was just for that episode or the past couple of episodes. I hope maybe they switch it up, but I don't know. So then we move on to the second episode, which I found significantly, not even more interesting, just like fascinating. Get to see kind of how Jeffree's makeup company has sort of boomed since the Shane Dawson series. And I don't think that's really a surprise. I think the Shane Dawson series turned a lot of people who were on the fence about supporting Jeffree Star into people who supported Jeffree Star. So you will always have the people that just won't. And then you have people who are on the fence. And I think that Shane series kind of pushed them over into supporting Jeffree Star because it showed a very different side of him. And we kind of got to see a little bit more of a vulnerable side. So it makes sense to me that business would sort of start booming. I think also with the Shane series, I think a lot of people don't remember this, but it used to be in the beauty community that supporting Jeffree Star kind of meant people were like, why do you support him? Like, why? Questioning, like, why do you support him? And now I think people who don't support him have become somewhat of a minority. And now the question is, why don't you support him? Why don't you do this? I think the Shane docuseries, the first one, is a huge factor in that kind of narrative being flipped. So we get to see the expansion of all the warehouses. We get to see sort of the inside. This is the stuff I'm very interested in, especially from a brand that is very successful like Jeffree's. I found it to be fascinating to see what a big high scale, like high level production actually looked like. It's so big. It's so much bigger than you would ever possibly think it would be. It was huge. And then we also get to see the killer merch setup where he has his merch thing. The more interesting part about this episode was less about that type of stuff and more about the actual numbers. So Shane asked Jeffree how much, as they were like just walking around touring, he was like, how much have you personally made from your most successful palette? Like you personally, just exit out all the other like profits, not even just pure profit, like how much you made, how much was in your bank account. And he was like, oh, let me just like do some math. And so I'm thinking in my head, naive little old me, I was like, oh, it's probably like $5 million, something crazy like that. And then he did like little calculations on his phone and he showed it to Shane and Shane was like, okay, I'm gonna show it. And Jeffree was like, this is probably minus $1 million because of like certain things. And so I was like, okay. So I'm looking, I'm like waiting, I'm like, oh my God. And then he turned the phone around and I'm not kidding you. I'm not kidding. My jaw like literally dropped when I saw this figure. So just from profit to Jeffree Star's bank account, not counting like every other type of profit he made, was $20 million, okay? Even after taking out the million, it was still, I think, $19.8 million. So that's just on blood sugar. That's what he made on one palette, was $19 million. I don't know why that was so like shocking to me. I don't know why that was, because I know that he's like a multi-millionaire. Like I know he's worth a lot of money. I know his company is very successful. I know most makeup owners are very successful. Kylie Jenner's over here being a freaking billionaire with Kylie Cosmetics. Like I'm aware that makeup is a very profitable and lucrative industry, but I think when you actually physically see a number like $20 million off of one release, shocking. Like it's so shocking. And then it got into even more interesting stuff. When they sat down to do the meeting for Shane and his palette, they talked at length about kind of like numbers and things like that. And they talked about, I thought this was really interesting, they talked about the price to actually make one of their palettes. So they used the blood sugar palette as an example, and they said the price to actually make that palette and fully make it, like palette, the packaging, like the component that it's in, the shades, putting the shades in, like pressing the shades, all of shipping everything, like all of that costs about $20 per palette. I thought that was extremely high, but then when I thought about it, I was actually like, no, I guess that's not that high when you consider the fact that pretty much everything Jeffree Star has done, starting with blood sugar, is completely custom. Those are all custom components. So the blood sugar palette, there is no, it's not like a cutout design. Like there's nothing else shaped or in the same packaging as a blood sugar palette. I would imagine most of the money that was spent making the blood sugar palettes went to packaging because that was just a really intricate and kind of interesting design. I would have been interested to hear how much it costs him to make something like his liquid lipsticks, only because that is in a more standard kind of bottle. Like other Wet n Wild has those bottles, you know what I mean? Like other people have those types of components. So I think it would have been interesting to know when you're using a more standard component what you would make. He did give a few sort of guesstimates of what other certain types of palettes might cost to make through major shade at Kylie, that her stuff only costs like $3 per palette to actually make, which I thought was really interesting. I don't know if that was just shade for being shade or like what the tea was on that, but I guess her palettes are pretty inexpensive to make according to him, and all of this was alleged. And also, you have to keep in mind that it is a business decision to share this type of information. It's definitely a business decision to be so open about this process because it is something that's been kind of hidden. And I think he knows, Jeffree's smart, he knows that it's going to benefit him to speak on this. It's going to benefit him to let people in and let people know the secret because it's something that so many brands have kept a secret. With that being said, he also could know that by saying that her palettes only cost $3 to $6 to make, he knows that that makes her look worse than his $20 palettes. That's why I was interested in knowing about the lip components that are a little bit more standard, and also knowing about some of his like previous palettes that do have a little bit more of a standard packaging, things like the Thirsty palette, and what are the other, his first two? It was Beauty Killer, I don't remember the second one, but he had two other like sort of just standard packaging, so I would be interested to know kind of what that was. But regardless, that was pretty crazy. I thought it was crazy when he talked about the fact that he could be selling those palettes for like $75 to $80. Personally, I think it's not smart to sell things at that high of a cost because I don't think as many people would buy it. I think he's very smart to keep the price in the $50 range because you're still getting this crazy exclusive experience. He is still making a crazy amount of profit on that. It's just not as much as he typically would make or what the industry standard is. He said the industry standard for like markup is like 750% markup, which is nuts, and also makes me, I think this is what it was supposed to do, but this definitely made me lose a little bit of trust in other brands that I like. Not trust, but just a little bit of skepticism of like, how much are you profiting off of me and my dumb ass like buying these products? Like, how much are you actually profiting? It's definitely an interesting conversation. I kind of wish more brands were more transparent. I guess it doesn't benefit it if all of them did it because they'll just seem like they're following the bandwagon now. But I think it's interesting knowing the actual cost per, you know, unit and things like that. I thought that was really interesting. He did also mention in that, because they were talking about Shane and his kind of like percentage of what cut he would get for certain things. I guess they're going to be making not only like a palette and a collection, but they're going to start doing Shane Dawson merch with Jeffree's company. When I heard the percentage that Jeffree gives the people who he does merch with, I was shook. I do merch, as I talked about before, and you do not get that much when you work with merch companies, especially like the ones that I work with that are basically like free and they're just for people to like slap on some designs, like people who don't have the money to buy stock outright. Like that's what Teespring is. And I think I make a very small percentage. So the fact that Jeffree gives his people he works with 70% and takes 30 is crazy. I've never heard of that, but I guess like I wouldn't, but like that was nuts to me as somebody who like sells merch. I was like, oh my God. I did think it was really interesting and also awesome that they touched on the idea of knowing your worth as like a creator, because I think it was interesting to see even someone like Shane Dawson be like shocked that he had so much worth. I definitely think even at a bigger level, you can still not entirely know your worth. Brands, I found this even just at my level and being a smaller creator, brands don't want to pay you what you're worth. They don't. They'll belittle you and make you feel bad to not pay you your worth. And in some cases, I think it's like different. It's like a different story where like Jeffree Star probably wouldn't be offering Shane like 30% of the profits if he wasn't Shane Dawson and if this whole thing wasn't like happening. Like, I don't think that's really the case. Like if you're friends with someone, it's different. But it's crazy to me that like brands up front, like even for like, Shane was talking about like going into meetings for like sponsorships and getting paid very little, like not getting paid his worth and just thinking that that was the standard. And that's what a lot of people think. I think a lot of people who do social media, because it's such a new career, I say career very loosely, but because it's such a new sort of like thing, nobody really knows what they're worth. And I thought it was awesome that they advocated for knowing your worth. They advocated for speaking up for yourself. Like Shane talked about how remorseful he was for not standing up for himself so he could have made a lot more money, and other people were I think what it comes down to, because a lot of people are like influencers shouldn't be getting paid as much as they get paid. And you could have the redistribution of wealth argument all day, like let's have it, you and me, like let's go. However, it's not fair for influencers, like what happened in Nikki Tutorials, what Jeffree Star talked about. It's not fair for Nikki tutorials to be making $50,000, even though that is a ton of money. It is not fair for her to make that much when Too Faced made $10 million. That's not fair. There needs to be some sort of like thing going on that makes that fair. And so I'm really happy they touched on that. I was really happy that Shane was kind of advocating for, like, in his own way, like advocating for knowing your worth, knowing that you bring value to something, and when you bring value to something, you should be compensated for that. And that goes past social media. I mean, that's day-to-day life. Like, if you are bringing value to something, you should be treated like you're bringing value to something and not belittled, so people can try to make you think you're not. Like, know your worth, basically. I thought that was really cool. The other part of the series I really liked was when they were coming up with the shade names. I just thought it was really sweet. I, like, always had imagined when I first started getting into makeup what I would name. I think all, like, people who love makeup do this, where you like imagine like what you would name your shade, like what you would say, like all of those things. I think that's like a pretty common thing. And I thought it was cute the way that he pulled inspiration from not only his like everyday life and his channel, but also named shades after the people he loves in his life. That's like awesome. I loved that. And I loved that when he was picking the shades, he pulled up things for inspiration, like the root beer can. It was just interesting to see how people and creative people kind of work to come up with these types of concepts, because I think the like making of a palette has never fully been shown before. So it's cool to get a behind the scenes of like a raw, that was their first day ever working on it, just their unfiltered creative thoughts that they were thinking and just throwing ideas out there. So far, I can honestly say I don't have a ton of criticism of the series, to be perfectly honest. I thought most of it so far has just been genuinely entertaining and interesting. I think we are about to get into some dicey territory with the upcoming episodes, and I don't want to speculate too much, but I do think it's going to be a little weird seeing all of the drama unfold from Jeffree's side. I think we all know Jeffree did play a big part in the James and Tati situation that happened. And I do think, despite everything about Jeffree that we've kind of learned, I think it's pretty obvious that like Jeffree kind of looks out for himself. In the first episode, he touched on the very first Dramageddon that happened shortly after the first Shane Dawson Jeffree Star series. And I felt like there were a few things left out of that painted the narrative to be very positive towards Jeffree and very negative towards other people. And even though like Laura, Manny, Nikita, and Gabriel, like even though that was a more negative situation for them, to pretend like Jeffree and Shane didn't put literal clips of like Gabriel, Manny, Laura in that first initial docu-series when Jeffree was talking about backstabbing friends and people who were just using him, to pretend that Jeffree didn't almost kind of incite that sort of response from them and kind of like talked about them and then expected them to not say anything back to him. I did find that to be a little off-putting. I think no matter what way you slice it, when we look into what's going to happen in part 3, which is going to be more about the drama of the beauty community, I think we are going to see it all from Jeffree's side. I think a lot of people, when they hear something, they kind of are just like, well, that's that on that. And I hope that there is like research done into what Jeffree was kind of saying. And it's not just taken as like absolute fact, Bible truth, like the Jeffree Star narrative. You know what I mean? I hope we're a little bit more critical, but I'll talk about that more when it actually happens. Yeah, I think that's it. I'm interested to see what the other parts are gonna be, because he said there's 9 parts to this. So we still have 7 left. I should do some quick math. We still have 7 left, and I feel like we've already touched on a lot. So this is gonna be a really interesting series. I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say. And yeah, let me know in the comments what you guys think so far about part 1 and 2. Like, what interesting parts stood out to you? Were you as shocked as I was about the $20 million thing? Because like I was shook. Anyway, I love you guys so much. I hope you like this video. If you did, please like and subscribe, or just like, or just subscribe, or do neither. Honestly, just so happy you're watching me. Thank you so much for being here. My merch, my social media, and everything I'm wearing on my face will be linked down below, along with a link to register to vote. That's right. Please go register to vote. It's very important. Registering to vote is important. Make sure you go register to vote in your local, state, and federal elections. And if you are not from the United States, make sure you're staying informed and involved on what's going on in your country and using your voice for positive change, because the world absolutely needs it. I will be doing another video on this when part 3 comes out, because I think there's gonna be a lot to unpack in that one. So you guys can look forward to that. And I'll be posting other videos too. So I love you guys so much, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.